Hello everyone, this is County Historian Larry Tippin. We've been doing a series on the tiny towns and vantage villages of Putnam County. And today we'd like to talk about Mount Meridian, which had previously been known as Carthage. We're going to be looking at a few newspaper articles and so forth. And if I get ahead of you, you can always pause the presentation or left click and pull it back to read a previous slide. Mount Meridian was originally known as Carthage, but the original people, the original settlers, called it Old Cat. It was laid out by William Haven in September of 1832. It was recorded in the deed books themselves, Deed Book C, page 22, but was transferred to the Plat Books, Plat Book 1, in June of 1836. Then Bryce Miller platted an edition in September of 1836. That time called Mount Meridian. We'll look at both of those plots and I'll show you what we mean by that. They wanted a post office in 1835, but the postal department said, no, there's already a Carthage. So you can't use that name for your post office. You can call the town whatever you want, but the post office needs to be something else. So they came up with the name Mount Meridian, which is what the post office was referred to, and it's still referred to, although they called it Carthage with a Mount Meridian post office, and they often refer to it as Old Cat. Then eventually, then the town just became known as Mount Meridian, which is what we know it now. This is 1879 Atlas of Putnam County in Jefferson Township. We see Mount Meridian, school number 2. Then part of it is in Meridian Township to the north. But most of it's in Jefferson, so we generally call it a Jefferson Township location. And you'll see the names you would expect to see: Hearst, Vermilion, Vaughn, and so forth. In the 1879 Atlas, they have plats of the various towns, and this is the plat of Mount Meridian. Trying to turn sideways a little bit because north is this way. You see the school, the 2 churches, the post office and store, and a public square. And the national road goes right through the middle of the public square. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then a sawmill, and then a gristmill. This is 1864 map of Putnam County, courtesy of the Library of Congress. You can go online and look at that if you want. They also include plats of the various communities. This is a plat of Mount Meridian. You see they have 2 doctors. That Bourne is proprietor of the Mount Meridian House. And James Matthews has the steam gristmill. They note the school and so forth. Already a growing community in 1864. What was originally platted, as I noted, it was called Carthage. This is the actual plat books. This is the plat of Carthage. You see the public square laid out. And the second page of that, it's hard to read. Apologize for that. I tried to enhance it as much as I could. It says William Haven Jr., proprietor, is who signed the plat of Carthage. And then this is the edition in September of 1836. By then, the community was called Mount Meridian. So the Bryce Miller's edition to Mount Meridian was platted in September of 1836. This is a list of the postmasters from the beginning of Mount Meridian until it was concluded. It's a long list. It's 2 slides. You can stop anytime you like. You want to read more. So you see the Bourne, Bryan, Vermilion, Cooper. Then on the next slide, we see Elmore's, Hearst, so forth. And then the post office discontinued in 1905. The Postal Department then enacted the Rural Free Delivery Service, where you had your letters delivered right to your mailbox, so you didn't need the local post offices too much anymore, and the small ones were closed, like this one. There's an interesting article in the Daily Banner of July 28, 1955. If you want to go to the Hoosier State Chronicles and read this article, then feel free to do so. I summarize parts of it here because it was kind of hard to read. They note that the Putnam County Historical Society met at the old trail inn. Mrs. Boatwright, Florence Boatwright, is the president. And they had a program with Miss Maybelle Wright, read portions of the historical sketch of the Haven Matthews family, which is kind of interesting. We're going to study a little bit of that. It said that in 1827, John Haven, living in a beautiful home called Lovely Mount, Southwest Virginia, near Radford, decided to make plans to come to Indiana, with some of his relatives had already migrated, some other members of the family. So he and his family left their lovely farm, went to Indianapolis in November of 1827, left wife and children in Indianapolis, and then went to eastern Putnam County and built a dwelling for the family. This proved to be a large 8-room house north of Fillmore. It's what is known as the Reagan and Day Farm, meaning Reuben Reagan. They're talking about the area called Eberly, which was platted by William Matthews, brother-in-law of Haven, which was a mile and a half north of Fillmore. Reuben Reagan and the Days and the Matthews were the primary residents of that area. Then later on, William Haven Jr. established the halfway house in Mount Meridian, knowing that it would be a popular stop on the national road, now called Highway 40, US 40. Built 1834, and then this family history goes on to note that Dr. Williams Matthews, descendant of the family, died in Illinois. And then another Virginia family was John Ridpath and his 12 children, and then so forth. This is a photo of the halfway house. This is from a newspaper article. It's not a very good photo, but we have a better photo from a postcard. Jordan Vaughn had provided this postcard. We've seen several versions of it since then. Very nice. Of the halfway house. There was a real nice article in the Indianapolis News, August 25th, 1973. I cut it out, and we're going to look at it in the next few slides. It shows that Eleanor Kamek, who's a librarian at Purdue for many years, an archivist, DePaul, and Methodist, talks about the halfway house. She's saying east of Greencastle on busy Indiana 40, US 40, Highway 40, sometimes called the Stuyvesant Road or the Indianapolis Road. As you drive by, you might miss, near a shopping center, a very interesting log structure. We'll show a picture of it when we finish. That was basically constructed from remnants of the halfway house. She talked a little bit about the halfway house, which is a regular stop on the National Road. We've already studied some of this. Named because it was halfway between Indianapolis and Terre Haute. It wasn't somewhere where you went halfway because you're trying to get sober or something like that, because halfway between Indianapolis and Terre Haute. Then as the years passed, they enlarged it and also enlarged the barn and coach house, which could accommodate 4 stagecoaches at one time. Then they also noted that they served delicious Southern cooked meals. Then even after stagecoaches, covered wagons ceased to exist, visitors would often come, including those from DePaul University, for the chicken dinners, which included the specialty of cherry preserves. One nearby resident recalled there was a time on Saturday night, buggies were packed around the place so thick you could hardly walk among them. Distinguished persons of the time spent the night at the hotel, including Daniel Webster, Martin Van Buren. We have documentation for those. And was last operated as a hotel. Virgil Mechanic was the owner, and he noted that all the registers disappeared years ago, including a paper printed in Grafton, Illinois, which stated that Lincoln stopped here on his way to the nation's capital and stayed upstairs in the East Room. Now, this paper printed in Grafton, Illinois, I'm not real sure what he's talking about. I did a very thorough research from newspapers of Grafton, which is basically a suburb of St. Louis, I never could find any newspapers that alluded to this, so I'm not sure, maybe it was a private paper, but saying that Lincoln had stayed there. And then the halfway house basically ceased to exist, wasn't popular anymore. And then by the time we had automobiles, you could drive in an hour or two from Indianapolis to Terre Haute. You didn't need to stay overnight as much. So the need for the inns and the motels and so forth along Route 40, as it was then known, were not as popular. So the halfway house then was sold, and the materials were auctioned off for just over $1,000. They talk about the interesting boards of many varieties that went into that. And then plans were drawn to basically rebuild using some of the remnants of those boards in Greencastle by Charles Hendricks of Bainbridge, which cabin they constructed in 1948. They noted too, in addition to the logs and so forth, the original latches were maintained, and then also noted that the doors themselves were quite interesting, and all of them apparently from different sizes, custom made to fit the door based on the lumber they had at the time. And then when they reconstructed this, they either had to make the doors fit the doorway and or cut the doors themselves. They're kind of interesting. This is what it looks like today. And this is a current picture, by the way. This building has been used for many, many things. It's east of the courthouse in Greencastle on basically on State Road 240. We call it Indianapolis Road mostly. We're just east of where Indianapolis Road and Franklin Street met. On the north side, there's currently a Kroger. In 1973, it's called Schultz's Family Store. Those of you from around Greencastle know what I'm talking about. But on the south side of the street, there's this building. It was made of the remnants of the halfway house at Mount Meridian in 1948. I always like to read some of the newspaper articles. Go to the Hoosier State Chronicles and search Mount Meridian, for instance, and come up with all kinds of interesting things. You feel free to do so. There are quite a few interesting ones. I'm sharing just some with you that I thought were noteworthy and of interest. This is talking about, it's 1902, talking about a reunion or the Alumni Day at DePaul University, where the class of 1882 had gone to the famous old halfway house and then had indulged in the chicken dinners and cherry pies. And again, feel free to pause if you'd like to read an article if I'm going too fast. I always like to see these. It's quite interesting. This is 1847, not long after Mount Meridian got its post office, where this gentleman has a horse that's either been stolen or strayed. 4-year-old mare, not male, 4-year-old mare, which is quite valuable to him. Horses were sometimes stolen, but sometimes they would just stray. Horses always know the way home, but if they go to a neighbor's home, neighbor's farm, and there's a horse nearby, they might get buddies with them and hang around a while. This guy wants his horse back. This is very significant, 1854. You would take for granted when the early post offices were created that the mail got from one post office to the next somehow. Well, this is how it was done. The post office, or the postal department, would actually solicit bids, usually for a 4-year term. This is a solicitation for the proposals to carry the mail for the 4-year term beginning July 1st, 1854. What they did was they'd advertise in all the local, or all the newspapers they had at the time, the Terre Haute newspapers, Indianapolis newspapers, the Indiana State Sentinel, and so forth, so on. And usually 1 or 2 pages, and they would solicit bids for all the post offices in the entire state at once. And this is one. This is 2, actually. It's kind of interesting. I wanted to share. It's from Mount Meridian, from Nicholsonville, 6 miles and back, 1 a week. Nicholsonville became a major stop on the Indianapolis Terre Haute Railroad, later the Vandalia in Pennsylvania. It was a mile east of Fillmore. We talk about that when we talk about Fillmore. If you'd like to go to that presentation, learn a lot more about those communities. But then the rail then would bring in the mail to Nicholsonville, and the local mail would be transported to Mount Meridian once a week. And then Mount Washington, which was a small community in southeastern Jefferson Township, the old Mill Creek Township, 7 miles south of Salisbury, once a week. So a farmer or a local merchant may supplement their income, make a few bucks by carrying the mail just once a week. And this is also interesting, in 1851, this is just a list of the post office within 50 miles of Indianapolis, where they're soliciting for the Indiana State Sentinel weekly. And then they're listing post offices. Newspapers back then were really delivered to the post offices. That's how you got the newspapers. So it's Mount Meridian, but then you see a few others, obviously an alphabetical listing, and I just cut it out. But you also see New Maysville, Bainbridge, and other places you'd recognize. Very tragic accident in 1854. The wife of Joshua Harrison, one of the oldest, most respected citizens of the county, passed through Mount Meridian. The horse was frightened by the steam sawmill at Mount Meridian. They did not have a water wheel sawmill. There was not enough water. So they had a steam-powered mill. And the horse was frightened. Threw Mrs. Harrison from the buggy. He was killed instantly. Very sad. This is an interesting story, 1889. Some of you may know this. You may want to pause and read some of it, or go to the Hoosier Chronicles, read the whole thing if you want. It says in September of 1899, there was a discovery of a charged human body in a brush pile, basically, 2 miles from Mount Meridian, in a secluded spot. And then it goes on to talk about this. It says the coroner gave the result of the examination and said the cause of death was from burning. So that's kind of sad in and of itself. Not like the body was dumped there later. And then a few weeks later, they did an update on this. So about the murder and the cremation of the body, Jefferson Township 3 weeks prior. Said the bones of the man were found in a brush heap that had been burned, together with some more evidence about knife blades, suspender buckles, buttons, and so forth. And suspicion fell on 2 men, Alfred Bowen and James Keebler, who were arrested in Brazil. And then they noted that Keebler may have had some evidence that would indicate he'd be connected to this, and that Bowen was born and raised in Jefferson Township, within a half mile where the spot the body was found. And then so forth and so on. Then additional light been thrown on the mystery, the cremation, referring to above points still strongly Alfred Bowen's connection, seen in the city, and I'm continuing on the next slide. On Thursday, the day of the Old Settlers Picnic, we've seen Mount Meridian near the scene of the tragedy by a shopkeeper who felt the body was his son. It's kind of interesting. If you want to read the whole thing, you go to the Hoosier Chronicles. Different story, very tragic. It's also 1889. Samuel Farmer accidentally shot himself in the forehead today, dying instantly. He was a former county commissioner, one of the best-known farmers in Putnam County, residing near Mount Meridian. He had taken a revolver out to shoot a snake. His wife heard the report and continued absence, caused her to investigate. She found the lifeless body. Now, I don't know how they knew it was a snake. The snake would not have just hung around to observe the proceedings unless he shot the snake and then shot himself in the forehead. Very sad story. But then here's an interesting article in the Indianapolis Journal in 1890 where they list patents that were granted, including a patent for a car coupling, meaning railroad car, by these 4 men from Mount Meridian: Henry Nichols, J.W. and E.E. Ruark, and A.J. Bird. It's kind of interesting. An 1899 article where they're reminiscing over 50 years prior about when President Van Buren, was unceremoniously dumped in a mud puddle by stagecoach driver Mason Wright, who was from Manhattan. Then Van Buren, who became president in 1837, talking about the opening of the West, and we needed roads. We needed some roads to be built and roads to be improved. Then as now, roads are very important. I'm not going to do the whole article, but I'm going to summarize some of the interesting parts of it. You can read it if you like. It said in connection with the roads, the contractors to build those roads were very unscrupulous. The contractors were very rife with graft and corruption, and Van Buren was having none of it. So he vetoed these road improvement bills because of the graft. He just thought it was so horrible that these contractors were lining their pockets so much, taking money from the public in the process. They vetoed the bills, which was not popular. Basically, the people did not care that much. They just wanted the roads. So in 1839, he toured the National Road in Indianapolis, St. Louis, noting that from then Indianapolis to Plainfield was pretty smooth, but from then on it was not so much so. An old Whig named Hale, who was one of the contractors, and he was one of the most seriously unscrupulous of the contractors, sponsored this event. Then he wanted to impress on Van Buren the sorry state of the roads, where he offered the stagecoach driver Mason Wright from Manhattan a $5 hat to dump Van Buren in a mud puddle in Plainfield, which he did at a large tree thereafter referred to as the Van Buren elm. It was noted in the newspaper articles that the Quaker ladies, this was a Quaker community at the time, tried to clean Van Buren's mud with sticks best they could. And also was noted his party included the second most important person in the country, the Secretary of State at that time. And by the way, Daniel Webster served as Secretary of State 1841 to 1843 when he stayed at the halfway house under the Harris administration. Then the party went toward Terre Haute, got as far as Mount Meridian, where they spent the night, as noted in the conclusion of this newspaper article, where they documented that they went as far as Mount Meridian and spent the night at the halfway house. And then kind of summarized conclusion about the roads. We know in 1840, the Whig William Henry Harrison defeated Martin Van Buren in his attempt for re-election. So the Van Buren elm stood in Plainfield. It's gone now. There's a marker commemorating approximate location of that in Plainfield along Highway 40. So many things were named after Van Buren then, including there's an elementary school in Plainfield and also one in Clay County and so forth. Interesting photos. This is one by the noted photographer Kamek. Noted that it was on the Mount Meridian Road, didn't say exactly where, about 1900, courtesy Putnam County Public Library Archive, which also provided this photo. Noted on the back is Alice and Henry Runyon of Mount Meridian. And then of Emily Farmer. And then there's also an interesting note in the 1910 Week's History of Putnam County on page 515, talks about Mrs. Farmer, who lived near Mount Meridian on Deer Creek in Meridian Township. That would be a little north of Mount Meridian. The wooded area, and only a small portion had been cleared. After her husband died, she and her two grandsons operated the farm, making it one of the best in the township. So that was just a few brief notes about the early days of Carthage, which became known as Mount Meridian. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you can come back. We talk about other communities later.